who I will introduce you to in a moment. We'll have opening thoughts and initial questions shortly, and then our audience will also have a chance to ask questions over our Q&A function. So a little bit of history. It was back in 2019 that more than 20 groups with an interest in the environment and quality of life in London came together to agree a set of priorities for the next mayor. The result was something called the More Natural Capital Manifesto, a shared agenda published in December 2020, the first time, and you can read it full on the Wildlife and Countryside Link website, which is wcl.org.uk. I'm sure that most of you who have joined us tonight will have read it, but if you haven't, it is very, very interesting reading, so please catch up there. We are, as everybody knows, in the clutches of a worldwide pandemic, and the natural world is under threat in ways that we haven't experienced before. Now, I don't really like to use the term climate emergency because I tend to agree with Professor Miles Allen, a world-renowned climate expert who actually has been giving lots of interviews this week, and I interviewed him recently as well. Emergency, he thinks, suggests that our reaction should be a knee-jerk one acted upon in haste. And while we should certainly act with urgency, we know that when it comes to our current global situation, it must be a well thought out collaborative strategy encompassing the many complex variables that are threatening the planet. Biodiversity loss, pollution, unsustainable business and agricultural expansion, soil health, and the warming of our atmosphere. All of these things have a very real impact on us and our health. As we know, we're in unprecedented times, and we know that we are in unprecedented times because people are using the term unprecedented times so much. So we need our cities to be smarter, to be cleaner, to be greener, and to be happier in these unprecedented times. As the global population becomes ever more urban, the UN predicts 68% of us will live in an urban environment by 2050. So it's staggeringly obvious that we need to focus on these issues to improve our quality of life and health and the health of the planet. London is of national and global importance, so who is going to be running the capital next, and what will their policies and environmental policies be? Well, let me introduce our leading candidates who are participating in the debate tonight. First of all, we have Berry as an Assembly member and represents the Green Party. So good evening to you, Sean. I called you Sean there for a moment. Rob Blackie, representing the Liberal Democrat candidate. Louisa Porritt is also with us this evening. We've got Leonie Cooper, representing the Labour Party candidate Sadiq Khan. Dr. Peter Gammons, hello Peter, the UKIP candidate. And we didn't think he could be with us at this particular moment because he was meant to be busy in the House, but he's managed to get here right in time. Paul Scully MP, who is representing the Conservative Party candidate Sean Bailey. So welcome to all of you, hello.
Hello.
Before we get stuck in, what I'd like to do is to hear from the people that matter. That's the denizens of London. So this film has been made by Lisa Thompson on behalf of More Natural London Capital Coalition. And it shows young Londoners talking about the importance of nature and the climate issues that concern them most.
My name is Kabir Kaur, and I'm a conservationist and a Londoner. We are in a climate and ecological crisis, with CO2 levels now higher than they have been in over 3 million years. Scientists say we have less than a decade to avoid climate breakdown. For young people like myself, we're not only worried about our futures, but also that of the wildlife that shares our planet with us, including our urban wildlife here in the capital. Post-pandemic, London needs a green recovery. But what does that look like? For me, it's about rewilding our city, increasing Londoners' access to nature, and educating Londoners of all ages about their local environment. During lockdown, many of us realised the true importance of green spaces in London, which are vital for both our health and well-being. But what matters to other young Londoners? Well, let's find out.
The environmental issue that I'm most concerned about is air pollution, but more specifically how it affects communities like mine.
The environmental issue that worries me the most is waste production, particularly that of plastic and food.
The most concerning ones are those of climate change and biodiversity loss.
My vision of a greener London is to see a lot more parks and nature spaces
I think this reconnecting with nature is a very big thing for us.
My vision for a greener London is one where the Mayor supports sustainable, healthy, plant-based food and also champions community-based food growing projects and local farms.
What I'd like the next mayor to do in terms of fixing the air pollution problem is firstly properly expand the ULEZ to ensure that communities within areas like the South Circular, which are predominantly black and brown communities, are properly protected.
I would like the next Mayor of London to expand and improve on cycleways and low traffic neighbourhoods. The more walkers and the more cyclists on the road, the less cars, which automatically means cleaner air for all of us.
I'd also like the next mayor to support local renewable energy infrastructure like wind and solar, which could in turn power our homes and also provide us with 100% electric buses and taxis.
I want the next mayor to address the issue of plastic pollution and work with councils to increase recycling rates across London.
We would like to see less trees being cut down and more trees being planted. There's a whole host of benefits which include reducing air pollution, which also acts as a mitigation against climate change by keeping the cities cooler during the summer.
I would like to see the next mayor help London get to carbon zero by 2030 by implementing a Green New Deal that involves green transport, green housing, and enables communities to engage with the climate crisis, as well as cancelling the Silvertown Tunnel.
My message to all the candidates is to put the environment first.
We need to tackle these environmental issues now, not later.
We need real change and real action.
Take these issues seriously and help lead the way to building a better and greener London.
To the mayoral candidates, whichever one of you becomes our next mayor, we hope that over the next 4 years, you'll support the recommendations of the More Natural Capital Manifesto and put health, nature and climate at the heart of everything you do, because we don't get a second chance to get this right. Now, it's over to you.
There we go. So that was Kabir Kaur, a young London naturalist with a strong, passionate message. Some of the things that were mentioned there: air pollution, more trees, more parks, reconnecting with nature, plant-based foods, community food projects, more cycles, more walking. I like that one. Renewable energy, cancel the Silvertown Tunnel. Real change was the message there, and put the environment first. Right, we're going to start with opening statements from our candidates, who've each got 2 minutes to tell us their plans and their ambitions for the Green Capital. A reminder to you candidates, the debate is focusing on the environmental and natural assets issue, so please stick to topic tonight. And Matt Brown from the Wildlife and Countryside Link is here with me for technical support in case I mess up, and he'll be watching the clock as well, and you'll hear his voice when your time is up, and I will stop you if you carry on talking and go over and over. And if I could ask our candidates who aren't speaking to mute themselves, and to make it simple, we're going to go in alphabetical order first. So Sean Berry, the Green Party's candidate, you're up first, and if other candidates, if you wouldn't mind please muting yourselves, that would be great. So over to you, Sean, and your 2 minutes starts now.
Thank you for having me. So I joined the Green Party for a reason. It's because they made the links between social, global, racial, economic and environmental justice in a way I knew was the only answer to building a healthy society and a secure future. And it was because for me, the environment we live in and share is a passion and a bottom line. I'm the only top 4 candidate here tonight, and I would not miss this event. I've been a London Assembly member for 5 years now, and my colleague Caroline Russell and I have pushed the current mayor to do more, faster and better, and we've given him some good ideas and clear research and proposals that have changed his policies, especially on planning, waste and plastics and pesticides. But there are still big gaps. We're far behind other regions on solar power. The Green New Deal budget in City Hall is at risk, and at tens of millions, only a drop in the ocean of what we need. On transport, we've seen some progress on clean air and healthy streets, but with a Green Mayor, these protections would cover all of London, and only I would put the right passion and urgency into these problems, and I would cancel Silvertown Tunnel. And nature too needs a recovery plan that we don't have. Our manifesto will put this right. I hope you'll read it. It was developed from and alongside a lot of the groups organising this debate tonight. And before I was elected, I worked with many of these groups. Since 2004, I was first a volunteer and then a transport campaigner as my job for 5 years. As a Green, I in fact helped launch and wrote forward for City Hall's very first climate action plan in 2007. And in my forward, I warned against fine words being spoken and then left on the shelf to gather dust. Sadly, this did happen. Things went backwards under the next mayor, Boris Johnson, and we are still behind. You have 2 votes for mayor in May. I hope you'll put me as your first choice and save your second choice for second best, and that you'll put more Greens on the Assembly too, where every vote counts, to make sure more of our ideas are listened to. The future of our city, we just listened to young people telling us this too, the future of our city needs everyone. And for me, it needs more Greens having their voices heard as well.
Thank you very much, Sian. And I think you were, if not a little under time, then certainly spot on. Thank you for that. Next up, Rob Blackie, who's representing the Liberal Democrat candidate, Louisa Porritt. Rob is a former strategist with the pro-European campaign group Better for Britain. Rob, welcome this evening, and your 2 minutes starts now. Thank you.
It's a pleasure to be here tonight, and thank you to everyone here for the brilliant work that you and your organisations do. London is at a crucial moment. With COVID-19, Brexit and the climate crisis, we need big ideas and urgent action. So the Liberal Democrat plan for London focuses on Londoners' basic needs: jobs, homes, and clean air. And these priorities must form the basis of our recovery. Now, I trained as an environmental economist, and I've spent most of my career working on environmental causes, including the UN Climate Change Convention and WWF. So I know we don't have to choose between the economy and the environment. We can have a green recovery, which creates great jobs for people and invests in better buildings and transport, areas where the mayor can lead our capital city. And a key issue tonight, I'm sure we'll discuss more, is clean air. There is no vaccine for air pollution. So the Liberal Democrats would immediately cancel polluting projects like the £2 billion polluting lorry Silvertown tunnel, and would invest in green transport infrastructure instead. We want all of London's buses to be zero emissions, starting with those on red routes. And we'll put green roofs on every building, both as part of planning policy for new ones, but also retrofitting old ones. We would rewild London with new trees and green walks and cycling routes. And we would introduce free bikes on Sundays, extending the Santander scheme much further into London too. There is so much we can do with right leadership and with Londoners working together. So I really look forward to this evening discussing this and other issues with you in more detail. Thank you.
Thank you, Rob. Thank you very much indeed. Next up, Leonie Cooper, representing the Labour Party candidate Sadiq Khan, who of course is the current Mayor of London. Leonie was elected in the London Assembly in 2016. She's a member of Wandsworth, has been a member of Wandsworth Council since 2008, and she's currently the Deputy Chair for the London Assembly Environment Bill Committee. Welcome to you, Leonie Cooper, and your 2 minutes starts now, please.
Thank you very much, Julia, and also a big thank you to A More Natural Capital, the coalition that has organised tonight's hustings. And thank you to everyone who's here today on the video call. It's very strange, these video hustings, but I think we're all getting used to them. And it's a great pleasure to me, having chaired the Environment Committee for 2 years and now being the Deputy Chair, to be representing my good friend Sadiq Khan tonight, who obviously apologises because he's unable to be here. As we work to rebuild our city after this terrible pandemic and strive to deliver a brighter future for Londoners, Sadiq is clear that a strong recovery can be combined with a green recovery. They should not be seen as being mutually exclusive. They must be one and the same. The climate skeptics and climate deniers say that now is not the time to focus on climate change or air pollution, given the immediate challenges that we face as a result of COVID-19. They are completely wrong. Climate action has to drive our economic recovery and job creation efforts rather than damage them. Sadiq knows that we have a once-in-a-generation opportunity to rebuild our cities across the country and our economies so that they are cleaner, greener, and more sustainable. What we've achieved so far, Sadiq has an incredible track record on green issues. After the previous 8 wasted years, in 5 years, he has taken the boldest action of any major global city to improve London's air. He's rolled out the world-leading ultra-low emission zone, which has cut toxic air pollution by 1/3. He's developed a climate action plan that's compatible with the highest ambitions of the Paris Agreement, and he's made walking and cycling safer and planted a record 330,000 trees. But Sadiq wants to do so much more. If re-elected, he is going to support London becoming a zero-waste city, continuing to protect the Green Belt, expand the ULEZ in October 21, and work to ensure that all Londoners live no more than 10 minutes from green space. He's put 50 million into his Green New Deal for London, and that will support over 175,000 green jobs. Please make Sadiq Khan your first choice when you come to the pink ballot paper for the mayor. Vote for Sadiq to continue the work that he's been doing on climate issues, on environment issues for the last 5 years. Thank you, Julia.
Thank you very much, Leonie. I'm now going to move on to our next candidate, which is Dr. Peter Gammons, who's our UKIP candidate. Peter is a motivational speaker when he's not on the campaign trail. Tonight, of course, that is exactly what he's doing. So how does he sell himself as the next mayor of London? Peter, your 2 minutes starts now.
I was very excited when they invited me to stand as candidate for mayor, and I'm very excited to be joining you tonight because environmental issues are very important to me. I wear my CPRE badge with pride as a supporter of organizations like CPRE and the London Garden Trust before I was running for candidate for mayor, because these are very important things. My policies, I believe, are the best green policies for London, which includes supporting CPRE's plan for 10 new parks and 1 million new trees. I have a strategy which we'll probably come to later, which is called my Plant a Tree by 23 to plant 1 million new trees. And one of my big policies, because my big thing is fighting for poor and disadvantaged families who are often left out, especially when it comes to green issues. And so one of the things is I want to beautify all of these concrete jungles and housing estates, which are often the places where much of the crime takes place. And beauty does make a big difference. And we'll get on to later why trees, I believe, are the most important part of it, but gives you an introduction that this is very important to me.
Thank you. Thank you, Peter. We know that you love the trees. Good to hear. Next up, finally, to give us his 2 minutes worth is Paul Scully MP. He's representing, of course, the Conservative Party candidate Sean Bailey, who also can't be with us tonight. You can explain why, I'm sure, to us later, Paul, but I won't let that carve into your 2 minutes of time to tell us why Sean would be the best next mayor of London. Your 2 minutes starts now. Thank you.
Thanks, Julia, and thanks, Neil, as well, for hosting the evening. I'm really pleased to be representing Sean. I'm sorry he can't be here. But, Neil, I was really grateful to see the More Natural Capital Manifesto that the CPRE and many other great organisations put together. There's certainly been a lot of common ground, and I'm pleased that you'll now be able to see that in Sean's published manifesto. As the father of 2 children, Sean wants to make sure that Londoners can grow up breathing clean air, playing in green spaces, because it's our responsibility to pass on a healthy environment to the next generation. But too often children in London grow up with breathing problems because of that dirty air. Too often those children don't have access to the green spaces that make life and living life in a big city livable. But that's why we need a fresh start under Sean Bailey. The spaces around us and the air that we breathe needs to be top priority for the next mayor of London. But Sadiq Khan has broken too many promises for us to believe that they are top priorities for him. As an asthmatic, Sean cares deeply about reducing harmful emissions and making London a zero carbon city. Making London the greenest city on earth is central to his plans, and clearly that's something, as a Londoner myself, I fully support him in that. He's going to ensure that we transition to zero emission buses and black cabs, to plant living walls to improve air quality around schools and widen our network of urban woodland, create wildlife corridors, revitalise the Thames, pave the way for a pesticide-free London and protect our green belt. As Mayor, Sean will make London a leading world capital by turning grey spaces green, capitalising on our renewable energy capabilities and putting London at the forefront of innovative green advancements. As Mayor, Sean's first step will be to treat the climate change like the urgent priority that it absolutely is. And to do this, he will boost spending to help create a green economy. By harnessing London's innovative spirit, Sean will make sure our city achieves its zero carbon target by 2030. Really appreciate you inviting me to speak today. With fresh leadership in City Hall under Sean Bailey, we can make London a more natural capital. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Paul, and thank you to all of our candidates. Well done. You were all in time, and important messages that you managed to get across there. We have got a very tight timeline tonight because there are people who are very keen to ask you questions as well. And we have some pre-organised questions that we want to set for you because we wanted to try and get as much of this agenda out there as possible. So I've got a question sheet in front of me now, and this set of questions has been sent in by all the environmental organisations and the campaigners for you. We've got 9 questions in total. We'll see if we manage to get through them, and they straddle various environmental concerns from different sectors. So I will start with, I'm going to start with the first question to you, Leonie, and Leonie Cooper. This is a question from the environmental charities BugLife, London Wildlife Trust and CPRE. That's the Campaign to Protect Rural England, London. The question is, London is a national light pollution beacon, a problem implicated in insect declines, migratory bird fatalities, disorientation to bats and broader ecosystem damage. What are you going to do to make London shine less brightly? What's Sadiq going to do, Leonie?
Sadiq produced and the Assembly agreed his new London environment strategy during this term of office. And it recognises in that strategy already that increased urbanisation of London has had a major impact on both noise and light pollution, and that can affect the ability of many forms of wildlife to breed or to feed or to migrate successfully. Now, GLA powers in this area are somewhat constrained, but land use planning policy is an effective mechanism to address some of these impacts. And the land use planning framework in the London Plan aims to consider these impacts, highlighting already the need for developments to avoid or minimise the negative impacts of light, particularly, and also noise on habitat and species. Obviously, that needs to be balanced with issues around community safety. For example, I'm in southwest London, and the issue of more light on some of the local commons came up after the situation with Sarah Everard, but lots of the environmental groups were making the opposite argument and saying, actually, we don't want to start lighting up more of the commons. So it's that kind of discussion that needs to be had on a local basis with local councils alongside the Mayor of London, making sure that wherever we can, we use bulbs that don't emit on certain wavelengths, and encourage councils to think about that, because obviously a lot of light comes from is under council control, and also to make sure if you can put shades on light that there's spillage is reduced.
And of course, you mentioned it there that Sadiq has plans for more affordable council homes, more housing. That's always a difficult bridge, isn't it, to cross? Getting those two things to marry up. Thank you, Leonie. Peter Gammons, you're a naturalist and very keen on wildlife. How do you take care of light pollution, and is it something you take seriously?
Yeah, I certainly take it seriously, and as mayor, I would make low light requirements part of London's plan and require it in all new developments. I think we, as has been pointed out, we have to combine safety issues with light issues. One of the things that I would encourage is the use of downlights to cut the spillage. And so, yes, I think this is a very important issue. One of the things I think that's most important to me in running for mayor is I think that we need lots of consultations and reviews. I don't believe it's the role of the mayor to impose things on communities, but we need to look at what is the best thing when it comes to safety, when it comes to environmental issues as well. So I'm very much for referendums and things. What many people don't realize was that UKIP, it wasn't about Brexit, it was about democracy. It was about the people deciding, not about, and so when it comes to everything, I believe in reviews, I believe in consultations, I believe in using experts to decide what's best.
Thank you. Paul Scully, what would Sean Bailey do about light pollution? Is it up there with air pollution for him?
Yeah, I think there's two areas to try and tackle light pollution. First of all, make sure you don't expand the light pollution as London looks to solve its housing issue, and then secondly, control what light pollution there is as well. And they're both equal priority. So first of all, in not expanding it, I think what Sean wants to do, as I said at the beginning, to make sure we can protect and enhance the green belt. So develop, sensitive development within London rather than expanding London's remit and boundaries further afield. Make sure that we can reclaim and revitalise the Thames as well. The part of the question was all about migration and about wildlife, and it's by restoring the Thames at the ambitious rate of 5 kilometres a year, we can start to increase marine wildlife as well. But committing to a green compact with housing developers. So this is, as I say, making sure that we can have green, sensitive developments. I see it as a constituency MP all the time when we have new developments, whether it's infrastructure as well, even things like football stadium, community football stadium. The technology has moved on in terms of baffling, in terms of shielding, light spillage, and this is something we absolutely must tackle with developers.
Rob Blackie, I'm going to move quickly to you. Thanks, Paul, because we want to try and get through as many of these questions as possible. Where is Louisa Porritt when it comes to light pollution?
Thank you. I think we'd outline 3 things we can do. The first one of which, some other people have mentioned this, make sure our street lighting is better directed downwards with less spillage. Secondly, making sure that major commercial landlords actually get the lights switched off at night. If you go to Canary Wharf in the evenings, you would think that everyone in Canary Wharf is working 24 hours a day. And I'm sure there are some people doing that, but the ability to switch things off automatically with motion sensors and with light switches has been around for some decades. And a lot of commercial landlords seem to feel that a building only looks nice if it's bathed in light at night from the inside as well as out. And then the third thing is for TfL to be very careful about how it rolls out digital advertising. It's been starting to do this across TfL properties in the last few years. And digital advertising is terrible for light pollution. It's also a terrible energy hog, so it contributes towards climate change.
Very valid point there. And Sian Berry, finally, what would the Green Party do about light pollution in London?
Yeah, a really good point there at the end there from Rob, I think. We do need to make sure we start sorting out how advertising impacts on our environment in lots of different ways as well, and on our well-being. We have specific policy on this in my manifesto, but it all forms part of the policy of helping to solve the ecological emergency in a way that really does pay attention to detail. And this is one of those things where you don't potentially realize the impact that bright lights are going to have on wildlife until it starts to happen, and then you wonder where all the bats have gone. So it's about making sure that you do this in a very, very fine-grained and detailed way. And we have something called the London Green Grid, which is something that my predecessor Jenny Jones worked presumably with the groups in this room to help develop, initially for the Thames Gateway expansion of London to the east, but it now covers all of London, and we need to make that work at every level. So in my local council area, we've been doing what's called a neighbourhood plan over a very small area, and we've paid attention to the ecological corridors, the green grid through our area, and helped to define the corridors that wildlife might be using, including through, for example, long series of back gardens that are running up towards the Hampstead Heath. And in those back gardens, we've specifically said we don't want light pollution. And so this can be done. It involves involving people at all levels in genuinely thinking about the details. And the example Leonie gave from Clapham Common is a really good one. We need a safe walking route through Clapham Common. That can be done in a way that also preserves safe routes and good ecology within the common, and it just needs to be done in the right way. I think as a Green Mayor, you'll find that I think about these things in a lot of detail, and I know that you could easily make mistakes if you're not listening and working with people on the ground. But I also know the best way to get a strategic plan for all of London that works is to work with everyone in London. So that is essentially what we do.
Thank you, Sian. Just to remind everybody, if you could try and keep your answers to a minute. I know it's very, very difficult. We're trying to get through so much this evening. We're doing pretty well for time. We're running a little bit behind. So next question, and Paul, you're going to be up first for this one, answering on behalf of Sean Bailey. This is a question for air quality campaigners. The health risk of poor air qualities are increasingly recognised, especially for children. Many London schools are adjacent to A roads. They're exposing children to nitrogen dioxide, double the WHO safe limits, the World Health Organization. In addition, levels of particulate pollution are severe throughout London. What action are you going to take over your 3-year term to ensure that children are not breathing dirty, polluted air for years to come?
Yeah, I'll highlight just 4 of the issues, Julia. First of all, making sure we can get a zero emission bus fleet by 2025. There's only 400 electric buses out of 9,000 odd. City Council talked about 2037. That's just not good enough. We've got to speed that up. We've got to support a greener black cab industry by providing interest-free loans to buy electric taxis. We've really got to accelerate the shift towards electric taxis, where cab drivers are already investing so much money in their cabs. We've got to make it easier for them to do so and incentivise them. Improve the air quality in London's tube stations as well, installing electrostatic filters that capture dust and metal particulates by up to 95% on every single platform, and plant living walls around the schools that exceed legal limits for air pollution, when we know that those living walls can help absorb some of that pollution.
Thank you very much, Paul. Leonie, what would your plans be?
I mean, I think Sadiq has done more over the last 5 years to tackle poor air quality than any of us might have expected after the 8 years of previous inaction under the last Tory mayor. And it has been a huge health problem for many Londoners. You mentioned schools, Julia, and at the beginning of the term, a report that he uncovered showed 477 schools in areas of really poor air quality, and that's now reduced to 14. But that's not good enough. We need to reduce that to 0, and a 94% reduction in the number of Londoners living in areas exceeding legal pollution limits, and a 97% reduction in the number of the primary and secondary schools is still not 100% reduction. So it's absolutely critical that in October 2021, that the ultra-low emission zone expands to the north and south circular roads. It complements the low emission zone, which covers the whole of London. And by the end of 2021, 92% of all of London's roads will then comply with legal limits for NOx. And then there are going to be targeted measures for other local roads. That sits alongside bus electrification, tighter standards for bus, 800 million that's been put into retrofitting buses, coaches, and London's lorry-wide tighter controls on non-road machinery. It's very difficult to deal with all of air quality because about half of it now comes from domestic dwellings. And so Sadiq has also been calling for a new Clean Air Act. We need the government to act as well. We cannot scrap the ULEZ expansion, unfortunately, which is something that Sean Bailey has been calling for. We can't go back to the last century where the car was treated as the king of the roads. We have to be moving forward in terms of health, and in terms of moving to the 80% in the Mayor's transport strategy: walking, cycling, active travel, or use of public transport. Thank you.
Thank you. Sian, 80% walking and cycling, is that possible? Is that in your manifesto?
That is the Mayor's target. It isn't good enough. We do need to be moving further and faster on this. One excess death from air pollution is too many. And I have to pay tribute with my minute to Rosamond Adukisi-Deborah, who's one of our candidates for the Greenwich and Lewisham constituency, who's fought to get a new inquest for her daughter, Ella, who died at the age of 9 from pollution, which this has been shown now in her new inquest, and the coroner has reported today on their recommendations for new laws and new limits on air pollution. We must achieve these. It's a basic right to be able to breathe air that is not going to harm.
How are you going to do it? 30 seconds.
So we need a wider ULEZ. I do not understand why Sadiq Khan has chosen only to go to the North and South Circular. It's quite clear now a whole London ultra-low emission zone is needed, and we need a target to reduce traffic overall. That is missing from the current Mayor's plans, and I would achieve that through lots of measures improving public transport, but paid for and facilitated by smarter, fairer road charging that is fairer than schemes that will charge you for a whole day just for going for one journey. We need something that's actually distance-based and based on impact. And I've been pushing the current mayor to do this for 5 years alongside my colleague Caroline Russell, and he's not done a shred of work even to develop this. We have to make a step change in action on air pollution because we have to save lives.
Dr. Peter Gammons, for UKIP, how are you going to save lives? How are you going to improve the air of London?
I'm probably the one that's not going to always be popular, because one of my concerns is that most of the policies that are being pushed by the other parties always punish the poor for being poor. We're punishing people because they can't afford to just go out and buy a new electric car. It was Labour who told them to buy diesel because it was good for the environment, and now they're being punished because they couldn't afford it. So while I'm a strong environmentalist, I also think that we need to take into consideration things that are punishing people for being poor. For example, the LTNs, it's taking the traffic from the multi-million homes and pushing it onto the streets of poorer families. It's pushing it in front of schools. So I think we have to review everything. And I think we have to ensure that green policies do not just punish people who are poor. The taxi drivers, we've forced them to get these new electric taxis, but the reality is they only do between 30 and 50 miles before they switch back to petrol. And now we've got them for 12 years on our roads because we've forced these things in it without considering the long-term implications of them. We're punishing the taxi drivers, and then we're allowing Uber drivers and others to pollute the streets. So I think there are many things. One of the things I wonder why none of the other parties have come up with is, why is it that when it comes to fuel, the cleaner fuels are more expensive than the worst polluting fuels? Surely we should be rewarding people for using cleaner fuels. So there are things that we need to look at that are not being considered by other people. And sometimes I really do feel, because mine is a
running over there a bit, campaign. Peter.
Okay.
Just running over there a bit, just let you know.
Let me just finish my sentence. Finish the sentence. Then, yeah. Mine is a conscience-driven campaign, and I think in developing green policies, we must also think of poorer families and not just be idealistic.
Rob Blackie, Liberal, the Lib Dems position on air pollution, please. 1 minute.
The good news here is you can have our cake and eat it, actually, because electrical vehicles are now much cheaper to run than fossil fuel vehicles. They are more expensive to buy, though, and that's why we have to help all the people who use them a lot to switch over, because a high proportion of emissions come from buses, delivery vehicles and taxis that drive around all day. And of course, they need a slightly different infrastructure, because they need to be able to stop in the middle of the day at a rapid charging point to be able to top up the car so they can keep on going through the day. So that's the first thing we'd do. The second thing we'd do would be taking action to specifically cut traffic around schools. And the biggest single thing we can do on that is to make it embarrassing and socially unacceptable to drive your kids to school when you don't really need to. And we all know that it's tempting to do that, particularly when you've got difficult and annoying children, where all of us do it sometimes. But one of the things we found at my local school has been getting the kids involved in lobbying their own parents has been super successful. Because while most parents are quite resistant to messages from the government or other parents, they're actually quite embarrassed when their children ask them why they're doing something bad for the environment. And the third thing on that issue, also about social acceptability, is about cutting idling while people are waiting in vehicles. It's actually very costly to people and very bad for the environment. Absolutely no excuse for doing it these days. And that's, again, something where we need to make it like smoking, where you wouldn't wander into a stranger's house and just smoke in front of them, or you shouldn't be parking in front of their house or stopped in traffic in front of their house and leaving your engine idling for 15 minutes.
So the third question is from the environmental charity ZSL. 66% of businesses in London want to reduce their single-use plastics, but they report barriers around cost and sustainability of sustainable and reusable alternatives. And refill points is something else that comes up. What essential support would you put in place to enable businesses who want to make these necessary changes around single-use plastic? How would you help them to do that? Rob, I'm going to come back to you for that.
Recycling in London has really stalled in recent years. The amount of recycling we do has barely changed in the last 4 years, and that's a real problem. I'm very proud that when we were in government, we forced Conservatives to accept a 5p plastic bag tax, and that has already cut the number of plastic bags being used dramatically. But obviously there's a lot more we need to do to get rid of single-use plastic. Other major cities around the world, like Delhi and Plastic, have pretty much done this already. So we get together with big supermarkets and all the boroughs to plan how we can do this for London and how we can make sure the plastics get collected in a way that's environmentally sound. One thing we can do very quickly is to make sure that we roll out water fountains across all of London's tube and train stations. If people are able to fill a water container, they're much less likely to go off and buy a water bottle. We know that 1 in 8 bits of plastic in the Thames is a plastic water bottle that's got there in some way from somebody buying a single-use bottle. And we can use our children to put pressure. I am only using a reusable cup these days because my children have forced me to. I'm too embarrassed to ever use anything else.
Paul Scully, what's Sean Bailey's stance on single-use plastics, and how is he going to make it easier for businesses to move away from them?
Yeah, I mean, it's a really stark problem. A quarter of fish in the Thames estuary have consumed and contained plastic. We know that there is something like a couple of billion single-use straws that have been traditionally used in London each and every year, which is an extraordinary amount. But there are options that we need to work through, either nudge theory, through business support, making sure that businesses have the right guidance and the right support to be able to pivot and change. You've got WH Smith's in Heathrow, ironically. I'm sure we'll talk about air travel at some point, but WH Smith's, every single bottle and drinks container sold within their stores made from a recyclable packaging, even the plastic water bottles, to address Rob's point. But we do need to work on recycling. It's not good enough for the Liberal Democrats to be coasting on this, because in Sutton, in my area, they've just decided to burn everything through an incinerator in Beddington. So you've got to have these pragmatic solutions in order to have a long-term approach that will take people with you.
Peter Gammons, where are you with plastic? Are you a fan or do you loathe it?
No, I'm not a fan. One of the things that I like very much is there are many countries around the world where they've returned to using glass with a refund when you return it. Glass, of course, can be used multiple times, sterilized, and away it goes again to be used. So I'm very much in favor of that, in having some return on the bottle, so people pay a deposit that's returned when they return it. I've always been concerned about plastics, especially when you stick them in the microwave, because they're made of petroleum. So I do think that it is a cause of many health issues, more than we actually realize. So yeah, I think that this is a very, very important issue. I do think we need to do more in London concerning recycling. I think we could save a lot of money if we were encouraging people to separate it for themselves. Certainly in the area of London where I live, everything's put together and maybe it's sorted out later, but that's something that people can practically do, to separate the various aspects of plastics and the papers and various other things. So we could save a lot of costs there if people actually caught a vision and understanding that they can actually do something positive for recycling. And so I encourage reuse and yeah.
Thank you. Sian Berry, it's a scourge on society. It's polluting us, it's polluting our seas, it's polluting our landscapes. What are we going to do about single-use plastic, and how do we get businesses, how do we enable them to move away from single-use plastic as well?
I really like that this question's come from business. There's so much hidden plastic now in products that are produced by businesses, that businesses use every day, and which we use in our own homes as well. It's surprising how much plastic there is in nappies and period products that end up in the sewers, actually creating enormous problems for us in other ways as well. Now, what's missing in London is a real zero waste target. At the moment, we have a percentage target for recycling, and we have an awful postcode lottery of confusion about what's happening in different boroughs. And we have a target not to export any waste and put it in landfill, but we don't have a target to reduce the waste we produce in the first place. That doesn't come from government or the EU regulations at all. The mayor doesn't have this target, and what that ends up with is more burning of waste in incinerators inside London, also adding to our air pollution problems. All these things are linked together. So as a Green, I want to make a real new mission for our economy to reduce the amount of resources that we produce and go through in the first place. And plastics are one of the easiest things to sort out, because it's relatively new, this problem. We didn't used to consume a lot of things in single-use plastics at all. So this is a question of organisation, collaboration, really just good thinking about how to organize things and good information for people as well. And I think businesses are key to this. I had a meeting recently with the new West End company who help run all the streets in the West End.
Getting to overtime there, I'm afraid.
Sorry, yes. And they are looking at how they can reduce single-use plastic in that area. And that's the kind of collaboration we need to have.
We've got to engage with the businesses. Leonie Cooper, what are we going to do about the plastic?
Yeah, I mean, actually, when I was the chair of the Environment Committee, we produced a report on single-use plastic water bottles, and that actually then spurred the mayor into the programme of water fountains, which installing them has had to go on pause during COVID, but he's absolutely going to start installing the 100 water fountains, refill points, and to support businesses to build on the existing network of 3,300 refill points working with Refill London, and that was at 200 refill points when the scheme started in 2018. So that's been quite a dramatic.
How do we help businesses use less plastic though?
So it's the businesses who can help with this, because if they are able to be part of that kind of scheme, and one of the things that the Assembly, and Sean and I both voted in favour of this, was to have London as a pilot, as a national pilot. This was again a recommendation in the report from the Environment Committee, to look at how we can get businesses, particularly the ones who are in the on-the-go food and beverage space, to trial getting rid of single-use disposable coffee cups, to have a tax or glass bottle deposit scheme for London. And we think if London can do it and make it work, then we can work with those businesses and individuals. And there's already been a lot of messaging to stop the individuals. Just on the point about reducing waste and stopping burning waste, I think we just need to be very clear that this isn't just a mayoral responsibility, like planning, and lighting needs to go hand in hand with what the boroughs are doing. And Sadiq has set targets for the boroughs in reduction and recycling plans.
Over time, I'm afraid.
The boroughs have to deliver it. Thank you.
I'm going to move on to another question because I'm not sure that we're going to get through all 9. So I'm going to move on to a question from the environmental charity Pesticide Action Network. London continues to use toxic pesticides to manage weeds across its public spaces. The chemicals have been linked to an array of human health problems and further deplete our local biodiversity. If elected, will you commit to supporting all London boroughs to phase out urban pesticides and adapt alternative weed management plans? I've gone to this question because you should be able to answer this pretty quickly with a yes or no. Rob Blackie?
Yes, Lib Dem Run Richmond has already committed to this, and I work with beekeepers and entomologists in my day job, and they constantly tell me how pesticides are basically like carpet bombing the environment, and it's absolutely ridiculous that we use them in London rather than allowing stuff to grow a little bit wilder.
So they would be banned. Paul Scully, what would Sean Bailey do? Does he think about this? What will he do with pesticides?
The short answer is yes. The slightly longer answer is that local authorities do use a lot of pesticide, and clearly we've got to lead from the front. You've had the likes of Paris and other cities in Europe that are way down the line with this, and so it's really important that we work with local councils to phase out pesticides in Sean's first term.
Leonie Cooper, what's Sadiq Khan done so far about pesticide use? What's his stance on this?
So the first thing that he did, actually, after I spoke to the Deputy Mayor for Environment and Energy, was to include phasing out of pesticides and herbicides in the existing London Environment Strategy. So it's there. And so there's been a massive reduction in terms of use in one of the big land spaces that's controlled by the Mayor, which is the London Legacy Development Corporation, has reduced glyphosate use by 30% already. He wants to work with not only the boroughs, and actually the borough that's at the front of this is Labour, Hammersmith and Fulham, but you also need to work with suppliers, contractors and the functional bodies across the whole of the GLA to bring in these safer alternatives to weed treatments. One of the really difficult weeds that is treated with pesticides is Japanese knotweed, and I think we're all familiar, it's a non-native invasive species that can, demolish concrete and buildings and all the rest of it. So it's particularly difficult to wean everybody off using it. But there are alternatives, and we have to be systematic. City Hall, in conjunction with the boroughs, have actually really got to take this forward. And we also have to make sure that along the sides of TfL's tracks, that we reduce growth so that you can get the trains running safely, but at the same time we do that in a safe fashion.
Sian Berry, are you going to get rid of pesticides?
Yes, of course I am. Yes, this is something I think we in the Assembly we all agreed that the Mayor should set this target, and my colleague Caroline's been chasing him up about this. We control quite a lot of land in the GLA, and we can get rid of the pesticide use on that land basically immediately. There are alternatives already. I think there are a lot of councils. There's a mixed picture in councils. So Richmond, there are Greens and Lib Dems there. They've done it. Hammersmith and Fulham went for it very early. Camden, where I'm a councillor, have really pushed back against this, and it bothers me because I represent people who live on estates where their estate gardens are managed by the council, so the places where their children crawl about and play are sprayed with this stuff and they have no say. If it's your own private garden, that's different. So I really want to get this sorted out, and as Mayor I would set a target to get rid of all the Roundup use in London within 2 years, and make sure that we're collaborating between councils who can help each other to get this right.
Peter Gammons, where are you on pesticides?
Yeah, I totally agree. I think London has to lead the way and then be an example to other cities of the world. So I'm going to give you a short answer because I hope you're going to come back to the trees one, which is my real passion.
I'm coming there next if you're quick.
Definitely yes.
Okay, well, the good thing about that is you all agree. There we go. We found something that you absolutely, a policy that you all agree on. Right, a question from the environmental charity, the Woodland Trust. We need to increase tree cover to fight climate change. What action will you take as Mayor to protect the capital's existing trees? Very emotive issue, this, and also to plant new ones. And as we know, planting new ones, we don't benefit from planting new trees for another 15, 20, 30 years. Peter, back to you then. I know you're passionate about this subject. Try and keep it as short as you can, please.
Yeah.
More trees.
Yeah. Well, of course, 15 years is worth doing for. We have to plan to the future. Back as far back as December, when it was first mooted to me to run for mayor, I came up with my plant a tree by 23. There's 8 million trees approximately in London. There's 10 million young people in schools across London. I want to bring young people to London to plant their own trees, to own London as their capital, and then to plant 1 million trees across the city. One of the things that I especially want to do is beautify many of the, it seems an unkind word, but concrete jungles. There are many people that are living in just concrete jungles, and I want to beautify them all because I believe that much of the crime and the problems that young people have is because they're living in such horrible environments, and we need to beautify them. Again, I support CPRE's plan for 10 new parks, and after that we'll go for more. Protect the green spaces, 10 new trees to developers for every one they remove, and let's turn London beautiful, let's turn London green, and let's plant trees. Can I just mention as well, the average beech tree sucks up 40 tons of carbon monoxide. And so I believe that they are the vacuum cleaners of the planet. They're the vacuum cleaners and hearts and lungs of London. And so more trees.
We might find that this is something else we can all agree on. Rob Blackie, where's Louisa Porritt's radar when it comes to trees? Is she a tree hugger?
You have to ask for that. Yes, I think we probably all agree, but actually there's a whole load of different reasons we want trees, not just making places beautiful, improving drainage, increasing biodiversity, dealing with climate change, dealing with air pollution. And that actually is why the type of trees we plant really matters, and making sure they're indigenous for biodiversity reasons, but also, and this is underrated, that they actually reflect the sun better, because the more they reflect the sun, the more they contribute to tackling climate change. And secondly, while the mayor should be planting more trees and hasn't done a great job on that, there are also a lot of programs they can be coordinating in London. There are a lot of voluntary tree planting programs at the moment. And one thing the mayor could do would be to get those programs together and make them more efficient by helping them to coordinate.
So plug into the volunteering network. Sian Berry, how are you going to plant more trees?
I think one of the points in the question was we have to protect the trees we have, and we've got a real problem with mature trees in the environment we live in not being valued. I remember a case I took on where a housing association needed to put up some gates, some security gates, and the trees were sort of there, big beautiful ash trees in the way, and they were like, the trees will be cut down, and we complained about this and we listed the trees, and it was as easy as anything to build the gates around the trees in the end. It really wasn't a problem, and we see far too many development plans where the architects just look at the space from above. They don't value the trees that are there, and they don't think about including them within what they design. This can be done. Now, elsewhere in my manifesto, if you search the word trees in my manifesto, you find it a lot. So have a look at all the other policies. But there's a really visionary policy for the green belt called Gold Plate the Green Belt. And this is a big strategic plan to work with the councils that are around London. And Sadiq Khan doesn't often work with those councils because some of them are run by the Conservatives. I'd get everyone together to make a plan for the green belt, which involves more tree planting, but also more farming, more access for people, better links for public transport, for walking and cycling, and just much more ways in which the green belt can contribute to London. And a big part of that is new forests and new tree planting and rewilding, because that's an area of London that is under threat. If we don't use it, we will lose it. Developers have their eye on the green belt. If we don't make it high quality, it will be built on.
Leonie, what does Sadiq think of the trees that are standing and existing in London? How's he going to protect them and get more of them? Does he care?
Well, he certainly does, because he's planted over 330,000 in the last 5 years. The previous mayor planted only 171,000 in the 8 years before that. He's now committed to planting a further 90,000 trees by the end of 21-22, so the year that we've just started. And he also wants to complete the creation of 2 new accessible woodlands, totaling 90 hectares in the green belt. The Greener City Fund has greened over 400 hectares of London through the improvement of existing green spaces, also planting of trees and the greening of the built environment. But I just want to mention the London Plan, which I mentioned earlier on. One of the new policies in the London Plan is the urban greening factor, which is going to really strengthen hanging on to the existing trees when people, and as Sian was just mentioning, it's really important about the canopy cover for existing trees, not just in terms of climate mitigation, but also in terms of the habitat. A large existing tree provides a massively much bigger habitat than a newly planted sapling would. So the strong protections in the new London Plan, which has just been signed off finally by the Secretary of State after a whole year of waiting, includes protection for the green belt, metropolitan open land, other open spaces, introduce the urban greening factor. And I think that will ensure that the new developments that we've just referred to in terms of the light pollution will also include greening in those new developments. The open spaces will be large, and also in some cases green walls, brown roofs and green roofs for the birds as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Leonie. Paul Scully, what about the trees for Sean Bailey?
Yeah, thanks very much. And it's good that we're agreeing on a number of issues, but it's beyond that. It's can we actually deliver it? And you've seen from Sadiq Khan, he missed his target by some way of 2 million trees. Only getting something like an eighth done. So there's no point promising and not getting there. And then, as we've heard and we've seen in the chat as well, a lot of people are talking rightly about protecting mature trees rather than just replacing those with saplings, which take time to grow. So they're a part of the solution, but so much more we need to do to tackle the climate change situation and address air pollution in London. Now, part of that will be working with developers to protect the trees and to make sure that we can have green spaces around us, which actually is good for residents anyway, apart from pollution, just in quality of life, but also creating new wildlife corridors across London, the whole of London, which is what Sean has been promising to do.
Thank you very much. Okay, that's we've spoken to the trees, and we're all in agreement that we love them. And we've got a question here now from Greenpeace. And who else is part of this? I'll read the question, I'll come back to you. Nearly 90% of London councils have declared a climate emergency. 90%. Guidance by the Committee on Climate Change is for a 78% reduction in UK greenhouse gas emissions by 2035. Using your mayoral powers, what steps during your term in office would you take to achieve these vital emissions cuts in London? That's from Friends of the Earth and Greenpeace. Leonie, please.
Thanks, Julia. Sadiq has been at the forefront of tackling the climate crisis over the last 5 years. He's been working with New York and Paris and has made London one of the first cities to develop a climate action plan that's compatible with the highest ambitions in the Paris Agreement. He's determined that London's recovery is going to be a green recovery, as I said before. His Green New Deal for London aims to tackle the climate emergency by doubling the size of the green economy by 2030 and investing in the jobs that London needs. And we are the only major city in the whole of the UK to have a zero carbon homes standard. As a result, in 2019, new developments in London achieved carbon savings 41% higher than the required by current national building regulations. And he's now going to roll this standard out to commercial buildings for the first time as well. Nearly 27,000 homes have been retrofitted or in contract to have retrofit through the Renew programme. And in March, he's just announced how his energy efficiency programmes have helped to secure more than £160 million worth of government funding for London over the coming years. And that's going to boost the Green New Deal mission. He's been calling for a clean energy revolution. It can't just be London, it's got to be the whole of the country. And I say that knowing that Paul is on the call. A £6 million local energy accelerator has been set up to develop local renewable energy schemes. And he's been funding Community Energy London and a series of projects across London so that we have, and we've had a solar together, which has been a reverse auction to bring down prices where people buy solar together, and working very closely with the whole of the C40 city network to try and divest London from fossil fuels.
Running a bit over there, Leonie.
And the pension fund is almost completely divested. It's down to 0.06%. Thank you.
Okay, Rob Blackie, what's Louisa Porritt's plans to cut our emissions and do it quickly? I mean, to cut the emissions quickly. I'm not telling you off. Not yet.
I'm going to focus on the quickly bit, because getting it to zero is a very hard job, but getting it down quickly is much more achievable. And I'd focus on three things, one of which are electric vehicles. We've talked about them a lot already, but the key thing about electric vehicles is, firstly, we have got much better at making electricity low carbon than we have making other things low carbon. So it's much faster to do. And it doesn't require us to train 100,000 plumbers the way we're going to have to do to convert every gas boiler in Britain to something else. So firstly, expanding those electric vehicles, starting with ones we use most, which are buses, taxis, delivery vehicles. Secondly, encouraging solar panels on roofs. Again, that is now something that's really good value for money for people to do, but most people just don't realize it's good value for money. So helping people with that to accelerate that dramatically. And again, we don't need to subsidize that very much because people will get their money back pretty quickly. And then thirdly, one of our flagship policies is to turn the spare office space we're going to have in London into homes. And there's a really important environmental impact of that, is that building normally has quite a large environmental impact because of the huge energy use of creating concrete. Concrete factories in their own right are about 4% of the world's emissions and are very hard to decarbonize. And so by reusing housing efficiently, or using offices efficiently, but we're going to need less of as people go into the office less, we can make huge carbon savings that way.
Dr. Peter Gammons, thank you, Rob. Dr. Peter Gammons, how are you going to achieve these vital emission cuts?
Yeah, well, I think 2035 is a great, let's hope we can reach it, zero carbon before then, but I think it's realistic. I will always be the person who, while being a strong ecologist, I look at the impact on poorer families, because that's my passion, protecting the masses. When people are pushing for 80% walking or cycling, I think about the parents and the grandparents who you don't think about when many of the young people are idealistic about this. So we need achievable goals, and we need to look at the impact. We need to look at coming up with long-term solutions. Somebody made the comment that the taxis having to recharge in the middle of the day. That is not realistic. They have to charge every 30 miles that they do, or they switch back to petrol. They can't even do a trip to the Heathrow and back without switching back to petrol, because we push something through when it's not developed. The taxi drivers tell me they're sitting on giant batteries. They don't know what the long-term effect of that will be to their health. And we've forced something through. I described it today on the BBC as it's like the children who they want something for their birthday, but that's not available, so they accept second best because they want it now. And we have to be careful that we don't accept second best. We need to be very careful to get the best for the environment, and also make sure that it's not just the poor that are penalized. In Norway, they call them Tesla lanes, because now the only people who can drive in these roads are people who can afford a Tesla. And I do believe that all of the other major parties are pushing through policies which are totally punishing the poor simply because they're poor and they can't afford to go out and buy new electric cars. So I will always stand up for the person who I feel is being ignored. But I have strong environmental policies, but I also think we need to be careful that we don't just penalize those who are poor.
Sean Berry for the Green Party. I'm trying to get to the end of our questions. We are running over. So if you could please give me your top two targets in terms of how you're going to cut these.
I don't shout out numbers. I'm from the Green Party. Rob made a really good point about speed, because it's the area under the curve that represents the amount of carbon that you do. And at the moment, the Mayor's Paris climate compatible plan ends at 2050, and for transport it leaves 2/3 of the work to do after 2030. Now, to me, that's not good enough. The Mayor has many powers, many levers in transport, and I've committed to achieve zero carbon transport in London using the Mayor's powers alone by 2030. These things can be done if you have the right people with the right ambition. Certainly on energy, we could do so much more for solar, particularly through Transport for London. As one of the largest consumers of electricity in the country, it could be driving investment. And the real problem we have is our existing homes. Leonie talked about winning 160 million from government. That's a drop in the ocean, but the fact is that's all that's available from government. Government's Green New Deal is in ones of billions practically. I was announcing when I was standing for Prime Minister effectively as the co-leader of the Greens, £100 billion a year, 38 billion of which was going to our existing homes. That's the neglected part of all this. It's something the Mayor doesn't have a lot of powers over. Government needs to act.
You need the money. Paul Scully, on behalf of the Conservatives, speaking on behalf of Sean Bailey.
Yeah, Sean's talking about setting up a London infrastructure bank, which can actually then help improve public transport, to encourage people, give them the option to actually get out of their cars and use public transport and give up their cars. In terms of fully electrifying, making sure that every bus is zero emission by 2025, that's way ahead of the existing plans by Senate Guard, and making sure that taxis, actually, we're talking about hybrids, but actually making them go fully electric, encouraging them to go fully electric through support, financial support, because we've encouraged them to make decisions, expensive decisions, but also giving them greater access if they've got an electric taxi in terms of where they can go. At the moment, they can't get to Bishopsgate and places like that in the city, which really has a negative effect on disabled people who don't have far fewer public transport options at the moment.
Thank you. Thanks for that. I'm going to give you 30 seconds for our last two questions, just so that we can get to them both, because I know that they're topics that people are passionate about. And then we're going to be taking questions from our audience who are joining us tonight. Thank you very much for being with us for this mayoral environmental debate. So question number 8 here is from the environmental charity Ramblers. You can guess what it's going to be about. During the past year, we've seen that green walking routes are essential resources for individuals and communities. Will you commit to the More Natural Capital Manifesto pledge of developing a strategic plan for improving all green walking routes in London and designate at least 6 new routes to help bring nature closer to people? Leonie, is walking important in terms of our rebuilding?
Yes, as I said in a previous answer, the Mayor's transport strategy currently, and if re-elected, will continue to prioritise 80% of all journeys to be made on foot, by bicycle or using public transport. And the Street Space programme has created 100 kilometres of new or upgraded cycle routes since the start of the pandemic, and more than 22,000 square metres of extra pavement space to enable people to walk in safety and comfort, and obviously during COVID to socially distance. He's completely committed to bringing nature closer to people, especially those communities who are much further away from nature. And that's a really important issue because some Londoners are some distance from natural open spaces, and no one should be more than a 10-minute walk from a green space. So he wants to develop and improve, and Sean referred to the All London Green Grid, London's network of green corridors to connect people with their town centres, the concept of the 15-minute city, which I know is something that Sean Sean definitely embraces as well, public transport hubs, places of work and people's homes. He wants to improve the existing walking routes, in particular the London Loop and the Capital Ring, while also backing exciting new schemes like the Camden High Line.
That's a yes. I'm going to take that as a yes.
Line. Absolutely. The Peckham
Rob,
Coal Line as well.
Rob Blackett, you're here speaking on behalf of Louisa Porritt for the Lib Dems.
Yes.
Where does walking feature?
Our manifesto calls for rewilding London. We support a green walking network. We also think not just out in the greener parts of London, but in the centre of town as well. We have to make it easier for people to walk around. For 10 years, we've called for pedestrianising of Oxford Street, and we need to encourage people to walk throughout London.
Peter Gammons for UKIP.
I just put my lights on. I hope there's no bats flying around at the moment. So yeah, again, yeah, my plan for the 10 new parks, my plan to make corridors, green corridors, especially for pedestrian and cyclists, for walkers. And so, yeah, I do agree. But again, I have to be the thorn in the flesh, the one that says we have to think about other people too, because it's unrealistic to talk about 80% cycling and walking. We don't have the weather for it. The average person is not going to arrive at work soaking wet, worn out. We don't have the weather for it. And so, yeah, some people won't like me for being a realist, but the reality is that you have to think about other people. One quick example, taxi driver telling me today how he had to drop up at one of these low neighborhoods, had a disabled woman. He either had to leave her at the side of the road or push her to his house, and got a ticket because he pushed her to his house. People are not thinking about the impact on disabled people, on poorer people, and on the majority. And sometimes it seems that people who have a strict policy, they try to force it on everybody else. I will be a mayor for all Londoners, and for your grandma and your mother and your father, as well as for the young people. So we win.
Thank you very much, Dr. Peter Gammons for UKIP. Sean Berry for the Green Party. Should we be encouraging all of our 80-year-old grandmothers and our young children, everybody, to be walking in all weathers?
There's lots of fundamental misunderstandings about the extent to which we need to give people choice of how to get around. But the question from the Ramblers, and I've worked with them, and I've left across the other side of the room the amazing map they've produced of the potential for new walking routes that really do bridge that gap between the outside of London and the inside. It's so visionary, and it does need to be integrated, and will be, with me as mayor, into the ecological corridors and the new parks, and linking up these spaces. It's a genuinely visionary thing. And I think during the pandemic, we've seen that the value of getting out and walking for well-being and being in contact with nature and being in a space that's not where you currently live is so valuable, and making sure these spaces are accessible by public transport and to people who want to wheel, people who want to get out and find an easy way to maybe not walk so far but just be in these spaces. That's really important too. It means working with everybody and listening to everybody, and genuinely having a plan and a vision that involves working with the groups who campaign for these things. It means not forgetting anybody, Peter, and I think you need to really genuinely take a look at some of these ideas and not just be blinkered as to the gaps.
No, I agree with him. I just want to make sure,
be, because they're not actually there. They're people, everyone benefits from having streets that are easier to get around on and that are quieter and with lower pollution. Everyone benefits from that.
Paul Scully, you're here tonight speaking on behalf of Sean Bailey for the Conservatives. Are we all going to be walking more if Sean becomes the Mayor of London?
Yeah, it's really important that we expand the opportunities to have enjoyable walks, something I know that's close to your heart. He wants to do that by doubling the routes provided by the Walk London network and making sure that those high quality walks walking routes are made attractive, but also safe as well. So it's got to be enjoyable and appropriate for individuals to use, making sure that they're protected, not lost to unnecessary development. But he wants to do that as well, protect people by making sure there's providing more 24/7 police patrols as well, not just to make people safe, but make them feel safe as well, so they can enjoy walking.
Fantastic. Thank you all of the candidates for being very swift. We're now on to our last question, which is from the environmental charity London Garden Trust. Your questions, audience, are coming up in just a moment. So first up, I'm going to come back to you, Peter, for UKIP. Questions from the London Garden Trust is, how will you, as the next mayor, make sure that adequate funding for parks is provided to maintain, enhance and expand them? So green spaces and parks, how will you ensure the funding is there for these important green spaces?
Well, as you know, it's one of the charities I appreciate and support, and it's the answer is priorities. The mayor has 18.5 billion to spend, and he needs to prioritize it. And parks and green spaces and trees and looking after the environment and beautifying the places where Londoners live, not just where the wealthy live. There are so many places where there are parks, but it's only for the residents. And unless you're rich, you're left out. And I'm a campaigner for all Londoners. And so again, I think all of the other parties, they have policies that disadvantage poorer people. So for me, the mayor has to prioritize the spending on parks, protecting green spaces and these issues.
Leonie Cooper, where are we with Sadiq Khan and Labour when it comes to spending more on parks and prioritising them more?
So the mayor declared that London was the first, the world's first, not just the national, but the world's first national park city. And over the last 5 years, he's been spending 13 million through the Greener City Fund, and that has greened this 400 hectares of London through improving parks and green spaces. And of course, I think during the pandemic, we've all realised how crucial access to open space has become. And indeed, some areas have become almost worn out because they've been so well used. And as part of the Green New Deal mission, which I referred to earlier, he's awarded almost £700,000 through the Grow Back Greener Fund to 34 local community projects that are going to create and improve green spaces and deliver local nature-based climate adaptation measures. The fund has been prioritising projects in locations with very limited access to green space, benefiting those Londoners from the most deprived and disadvantaged communities. And although most parks are the responsibility of the boroughs, and obviously most of the 18.5 billion pounds of the mayor's budget can't just be moved out of the police and the fire brigade and only into parks, he is going to continue to work with the boroughs and to get them to prioritise money through the Green New Deal Fund to provide more money to improve access to parks and open spaces and to help with those improvements that we need as a result of overuse during the pandemic, or extra new use. I don't want to call it overuse, really. It's new use, and let's keep people out there. Let's improve.
Paul Scully for the Conservatives. Sean Bailey, who is the candidate for mayor, is very passionate about air pollution. Where does he stand on parks, and will he prioritise putting those budgets first and foremost to create more green spaces in London?
Yeah, absolutely. You can declare whatever name you want, but if you don't actually deliver anything, then that doesn't actually get an outcome, which is for Londoners, which is what we really need, that strong leadership. London's 3 times the size of the next European city, yet 40% of people with an ethnic minority background actually don't have access to those green spaces really nearby. But Sean is absolutely committed to creating 300 new pocket parks to make sure that we can dot those around London using the funding available from the Street Space Fund, the Livable Neighbourhood Fund, to create those parks.
Rob Blackie, Liberal Dems, talking on behalf of Louisa Porritt tonight. How are you going to secure the funds to create more parks in London, and is it a priority for the Liberal Democrats?
Absolutely. Our manifesto promises 10 more parks in London. I think one of the things we can help with is by being a little bit less obsessed by green lawns, we can actually save money in parks. The constant need to cut lawns and to cover them in pesticides actually costs quite a lot of money and is environmentally damaging. So that's one way in which we can save the money. Another thing I really would like to see more of in London is an initiative which Sutton Council have done, which is to say that all new developments have to have net environmental gain, so that when people create a new development, they often have to do a little park alongside it or improve a piece of green space nearby.
Thank you very much. And finally, Sian Berry for the Green Party.
Completely. The manifesto asks for 10 new parks. I've put at least into my manifesto because I think we can do more than that. The mayor can, sorry, Peter, the mayor can
No, I agree.
insist that we put new parks into mayoral development areas. I want to make a new mayoral development area at City Airport where we put green parks, for example. But the mayor can do more. The grants that Leonie talked about, I want to expand them. But at the moment, that kind of capital investment in improving and increasing green space is at risk due to the political football that is our finances at the moment, and the row that is going on between the government and the mayor. All the kinds of borrowing we want to do to invest, all that kind of infrastructure is under threat. And the management of parks is also under threat. A lot of that is done through local authorities, and local authorities have faced 10 years of austerity cuts, and parks have really felt this. A lot of parks are now being run effectively by volunteers who are appealing for charitable donations. Too many of our parks are being used for paid events too often that exclude the public. And I'm really passionate, and I've won new planning policies that ensure public access to public spaces isn't just closed off for private interests. But this is going on simply to make ends meet. We have to make sure councils have the funding to run parks properly, and that we're not all just spending all our time fundraising, that we're spending our time actually improving, enjoying and running the parks for public benefit, because they're such an essential part of our city.
Sian, thank you very much. And thank you to all of the candidates for answering all of those questions. What we've tried to do here this evening is to encompass a wide range of topics that we know people out there are passionate about and want to hear about. And now it is the chance for our audience to ask some questions. Although we've covered some good topics there. Neil Sinden is the director of CPRE London, and he's been very instrumental in pulling everything together and pulling this coalition together. So thank you, Neil, for all of your work so far. You've been combing through the audience questions. So what have you got for us? And candidates, you've got 1 minute to answer all of these, please. But Neil, you've got to wrangle them.
Thanks, Julia, and thanks to all the candidates. I think you've done an amazing job in covering a huge range of issues so far. But we have over 125 questions in the Q&A panel. You'll be pleased to hear a lot of them repeat or overlap with each other. So we're going to try and do a handful if we can. The first one is from Sarah Williams, who is a member of Sustain, the Alliance for Food and Farming, and her question relates to food. She asks, community food gardens have provided healthy food, fresh air and boosted mental health during the pandemic, as well as improving access to green space and wildlife, but not everyone has access and many are under threat. As Mayor, what would you do to ensure that all Londoners can grow their own food?
I'm going to make it easy, and Sian, we're going to go in alphabetical order. So if you'll start this one, please.
Excellent. Sustain had a big influence on our manifesto, and there are huge swathes of policies about food. And this is so important because it brings all these things together. I talked a lot about the links. It's about improving, creating green spaces, creating spaces that are more natural. It's about also giving people education, nice things to do for their well-being, and of course providing food, helping to close those gaps in food access to healthy food that can occur when people are in poverty, and that is a growing problem. So the more we can be doing community work that closes all these gaps and provides all these benefits, absolutely the better. And there are a lot of policies to do that in my manifesto. Please read it.
Rob Blackie.
At the moment, the default for public land is that you're not allowed to do anything with it unless the public body gives you permission to. And I think we should move much closer towards making it easy for people to set up community gardens in pretty much all of that spare space that's publicly accessible. Obviously not the railway cuttings, but the stuff out the green outside blocks of flats and outside council offices and stuff like that, which cumulatively across London is a huge area available. And it's always much more interesting to see somebody's garden than it is to see a flat piece of grass. Of course, it's much better environmentally, and it's better for the people who are gardening.
Good point there about the land use. Leonie Cooper, representing Sadiq Khan.
I mean, I talked a little bit about community gardens earlier on, and that's obviously something that's very dear to the Mayor's heart. This is again an area where it's really important to see that partnership between City Hall and also local councils. Just as the mayor has control over 5% of the roads and the boroughs have control over 95% of the roads, most of what goes on in London in terms of where you could grow food is going to be something where you have to go and talk to the boroughs. So I'll just make a quick reference to the existing London plan and the fact that that is now very much focusing towards the ability for enhancement in many areas. It's an area that the London Assembly Environment Committee, myself working in conjunction with Sian's colleague Caroline Russell, produced a report on growing foods, particularly in outer London areas, using parts of the green belt. We think this is a really exciting agenda, and I would encourage everyone to look not just at the Green Manifesto, but also to look at the Labour Manifesto. It's something we would really, really hope to start to see much more of. And there's so many Labour councils all over London who have been working together with the Mayor's advisors and the Mayor and have been implementing community gardens left, right and centre. It's something that is really, really important.
Dr. Peter Gammons from UKIP, should we be encouraging green fingers? I'm just going to pick up on a few things that people are saying on the chat here as well. Green education and green apprenticeships for the young who've been left behind is one idea. Bring back park keepers and peripatetic outdoor youth workers to engage with teenagers and teach stewardship of green spaces. And many community gardens start with guerrilla gardening. Permission comes later. What's your stance on this?
Yes, everybody's been talking about community gardening. I don't know how about growing your own vegetables in urban areas, but when I was young at school, we learned lots of things about how to grow things and things like that, and it was very, very important. I must say that I was sitting here kind of a bit bewildered at the Labour, and I shouldn't pick on people, but talking about how important it was to Sadiq Khan, but saying that they'd spent 13 million on it, which, when you look at his PR budget, it seems a very small amount if it's a priority, but I don't mean to be unkind. I don't want people to be unkind to me. But I do think we need to make it a greater priority, and community gardens is a great thing. And if you decide to grow vegetables and carrots there, please tell me where it is, because I love them.
Paul Scully, on behalf of Sian Bailey for the Conservatives, are you going to be rummaging in the vegetable patches as well?
Yeah, I think they're a really good idea, and there's some fantastic examples. And I think this is a really good case where the Mayor needs to show, first of all, use their influence, but also show some real leadership on this and any number of related issues. And leadership, what I mean by that is being able to work with organisations like Sustain, but work with the boroughs, as we've already heard, and with government to make sure that things that are out of the Mayor's direct influence, they can actually make sure they can collaborate. Some of the things I do as Minister for London, which gets really frustrating, is I have to just factor in when I'm working with the Mayor, any sense of collaboration that he's really, I just know he's sort of like waiting to point a wagging finger at the government rather than true collaboration. So we need someone that can have strong leadership and that can work with everybody across London to make these a reality.
Thank you. Time for the next question. A couple of other comments on the chat here. Please check out the Living Streets Manifesto for walking and send a copy to the candidates. So check out the chat bar for that. And funded initiatives to boost mental well-being in green spaces, especially for people who have to shield and who've had to shield for the last year and are concerned about the impact of being outdoors. A suggestion there. Neil, what's next from people through our Q&A mechanism?
Myself. Right, Julia, there are quite a few questions, as you won't be surprised to hear, about cars and car use and modal shift. I'm going to pick one out, which is an interesting take on this and something close to CPRE London's heart. It's from Henrietta Bewley, and she says, most private vehicles don't move for 95% of the time. They take up 14 kilometres squared of equivalent to 10 Hyde Parks. When Londoners are asked what their priorities are for streets, they want trees and green space, clutter-free pavements, children's play space, and community and recreation space. How do we get from parked cars occupying 14 square kilometres to trees, play spaces, and community spaces?
Sian, we'll start with you again. How do we do that? How do we move people out of the cars, get rid of the cars? Can we get rid of them entirely?
So I think there's a lot of talk about cars in this debate, actually, and transport is about a lot more than cars, and solving transport is about giving people alternatives to use the car. Caroline and I in the London Assembly have surveyed Londoners, and we found about a fifth of people have said they feel forced to own a car, and that is wrong. Everybody needs the choice. And so our policies are about the target I talked about earlier is about reducing traffic miles. It's about making sure that we reduce the length of journeys people are taking, maybe the number of journeys people are taking first off, and then creating some space, and then investing the money that we raise in better alternatives, and then continuing the process. This is a process of improving our city. There isn't a silver bullet for transport. There's no all cars are bad, everything has to go immediately. We have to set the right targets and move in the right way, in an integrated and transformative way, and do it as a mission, bringing everybody with us, and doing it by consent, by using the money we raise from changing things in one way into investing in changing things in another way. And one example I would give, which I probably haven't mentioned yet today, is reducing the fares for people in outer London so that everybody can more easily use public transport when they have less money. These are important things. So this is absolutely what we have to do. And the space that cars use up, which Henrietta raised in her point there, is another reason why we must do it. We must get more of our land used for people, not just for storing vehicles. That's not very efficient in anyone's book.
Rob Blackie, you are a strategist and you're advising our mayoral candidate, Louisa Porritt. How do we make this jigsaw fit together and work with cars and space and public transport? What does the Mayor of London do?
I think we have to be opportunistic, which is at the moment car ownership in London has been falling for some years. Not super fast, but a little bit each year. And if you live on many bits of London, you can see that starting to happen. And I think that means we're not going to see a sudden moment where half of the cars disappear off every street in London. That's not going to happen realistically. What's going to happen is going to be a little bit more space every day. And we should make it easier for people to put things like planters and seats out on the road where it's safe to do so. So they can gradually start to use that space on their streets better and enjoy it, because we're not going to be able to take back like an entire lane of a road in the foreseeable future.
Interesting. Leonie Cooper, representing the Labour Party and obviously representing our current Mayor, Sadiq Khan. This is an ongoing piece of work for you.
Absolutely, Julia. And if the mayor is re-elected, I keep referring to the transport strategy, and it's been misrepresented a couple of times by Peter Gammons, who seemed to think that I was saying that 80% of all journeys had to be on foot or by bicycle. It's actually on foot, by bicycle, or by public transport. And it's really important, the issue about making public transport affordable, and that's why the mayor froze fares for 4 years, to make it affordable for people to use it, because our fares are really, really quite high in London. But it's also really important that he introduced the hopper fare, so that you could change buses in the same hour, and it was like changing tubes. You didn't then have to pay again, because that then starts to persuade people that actually they can daringly give up their car. And about 50% of Londoners now no longer have a car, and they rely on foot or bicycle or going by public transport. So affordability is a really important thing. But also the other thing that Sadiq did was, immediately he was elected, was started to consult with people about the changes he wanted to make with the ultra low emission zone, and trying to persuade people to change the kind of vehicle they were driving, as well as trying to persuade people away from actually owning vehicles altogether. And I think the whole agenda of talking to people about moving away from the car but joining a car club, so for that 20% of journeys when they might need one because they've got very heavy shopping or very long journey, an awkward journey, they need to go to the dump, they want to go and do some recycling, all of those things. And it's that sort of persuasion away from feeling I must have my own vehicle. I must also mention larger vehicles, which have been coming much more onto the roads of London in the last few years, persuading people that they don't need to drive a sports utility vehicle that absolutely is enormous and pumps out an awful lot of fumes, is absolutely critical. And it's going to be a process that is not going to happen overnight. But the more that we all feel that we can share a vehicle, not have to, I don't feel the need to own my own tube train, my own bus, why can't I share having a car with several of my neighbours? And it's moving into that kind of headspace. I don't need to own a taxi. I use a taxi for a short period of time. Lease a car, borrow a car, share a car, join a car club, so that when you need a vehicle, you still have access to one, but use active travel. And that, of course, also helps with not only air quality, but also the obesity crisis. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Peter Gammons. For you, Kip, you're not going to get 80% of people, you don't believe. You just can't get them all to walk or to cycle or to use public transport. It's not feasible. It's not realistic.
Yeah, that is true. I was pleased to hear Sian say that it's choice, and I think that's important. To understand my background, I was raised on a council estate, and my family were one of the last families to have a car. So I know how important a car can be to a family. I had to walk. We had to cycle in the snow, in the rain. And so I do feel that I become defensive for people's need for a car. Now, sharing cars and all that is very idealistic. It might be a possibility, but when the clutch goes, who's going to get the blame for it? Is it going to set for... I think that people are pushing things without actually thinking the full implication. I think the broader picture, I look at the pros and cons of everything, because I think everything has to be taken in context, so that, because as I said before, I think that the mayor's policies is trying to take us back to the 19th century. I want to move us into the 21st century, 19th century, where everybody walked or cycled except the poor, except the rich, and telling everybody to bike and going around in a 5-litre Range Rover that's not even a hybrid. Isn't that true? It seems like there's so much hypocrisy being pushed. And so I'm always going to defend, but as I'm pleased to hear that people are giving up their cars, I think that's good. But when you take it, and when it's the poor that you're punishing, because they're paying 25, isn't it, in ULEZ and congestion charge. That's for some of them half of their salary going because they have to drive. You can tell them they can walk or ride a bike, but for a nurse who's doing night work or many other things, for disabled people don't think about those. I always do. And so I want policies that are fair as well as good for the environment and all of these other issues.
Paul Scully, for Sean Bailey, what is the fair policy when it comes to cars and public transport, and how do we get rid of 10 Hyde Park's worth of parked cars taking up London space?
Yeah, well, first of all, let me congratulate Sadiq Khan for introducing the Hopper Fair. Can I also congratulate the Lib Dems for thinking of it in the first place? But I wouldn't like, but also the fare freeze that we've heard about. The problem is it's effectively a freeze for tourists, because it's only on those single fares. It doesn't work for the majority of people who are like me, who are tapping in and out or using their annual cards and these kind of things, and I've got to commute back afterwards. I'm not going to benefit from the fare freeze. So it's actually making sure that you've got a sustainable option before you're forcing people out their cars. Give them a reason to actually get out their car for the first place by having decent public transport in some of the areas, especially around South London, where they're not as well connected, in parts of Sutton, Bexley, Hammersmith Bridge. And I talked a little bit earlier about Sean Bailey bringing in the London Infrastructure Bank for public transport improvements. That includes Hammersmith Bridge, where some people might talk about driving, but actually there are hundreds of children that reliant on that bridge when it was there and functional, to be able to use both the schools in Barnes and over the other side in Hammersmith. At the moment, they're having to drive around and use alternative routes across Putney Bridge and Chiswick Bridge and those kind of things. Parking charges, actually, if you increase parking charges for street parking, the problem is you do then miss out on richer people who are insulated from a lot of this because they've got driveways. And so we want to, as I say, encourage people out of their cars, but also flexible working to make sure that we can have people living closer to their work and maybe not having to do the big commute all the time. And that's my day job as business minister. That's actually one of my big jobs to work on. I took Sean to Belmont in South London, where we've got a new hospital being built, and we've got a cancer hub that we're trying to do. Life sciences clustered there with 14,000 great jobs. But we've had the tram extension cancelled as a result of TfL finances, and it's a single track rail. This desperately needs to be upgraded. That's what the London Infrastructure Bank will be there to do.
Thank you very much, candidates. Neil, do we have time for one more question, or are we desperately over time now?
Well, I think we've probably got time for one more, and this is the paradox, the big paradox. We've heard great commitments and comments from all the candidates about how much they value trees and green spaces and so on and so forth. But the great paradox is that these green spaces are constantly under threat. And Richard McKeever and others have asked the question in this way, really. Our local parks and green spaces have been vital for our health and well-being over the last 12 months, particularly for those that don't have access to outdoor space at home. What will the Mayor do to protect our parks from loss to building and development?
Sian Berry for the Greens, what will you do to protect our green spaces in London and prevent them from being built on with the much needed housing?
I've been working really hard on these issues through the London Plan, through campaigning with people across London who've lost homes, lost green spaces due to inappropriate development. And we've got some good new policies. We've pushed into the London Plan new guidance on estate regeneration, new guidance on what you do when you're building on areas where there are people's homes. But I want to go further than that. I want to make sure that all development in London is led from the grassroots, and I've got plans for a People's Land Commission. That means every area of London being supported by the Mayor to look at the land we have, look at what's being underused, look at what needs protecting, look at what needs to change about how our land is used, and where new homes could go with the consent of local people, and to make those plans locally, and then help as Mayor to put together plans to fund what goes on there. There is £500 million lying idle in the grants we've already had from government to fund new housing, and I'd make sure that goes into plans put together by people across London. And if you think about how that would work, there's no way a local community who values a green space would look at it and go, let's get rid of that. But that happens far too often when big developers look at it, because they can just see the pound signs. As a Mayor, I want to make sure that we develop London for London, not for other people's profits.
Rob Blackie, what will Louisa Porritt do to protect the green spaces and somehow try and balance out the housing crisis?
The simple answer is to turn spare office space into homes. And we know that people aren't going to go back to offices in quite the same way they were. It's not that we'll all work from home every day, but it is true that we'll probably work from home twice, 3 times, 4 times as much as we were beforehand. And that means that every major business that has big offices will need less office space. And in time, they will move into smaller offices in one way or another. And we could easily see 30% less office space being needed. And that would mean millions of square meters, from an estimate of 3 million square meters of spare office space that can be converted into housing. And that's buildings that are already built, so they're relatively straightforward to convert. And it doesn't mean you need to build on any new land at all.
Leonie Cooper, representing the Labour Party and representing Sadiq Khan. How will Sadiq Khan continue to protect green spaces and create the vital housing that's needed as well in the capital?
Thanks, Julia. I mean, that's why the new London Plan, which is now fully signed off, as well as identifying targets for housing that needs to be built, also enshrines the urban greening factor, which I mentioned earlier on, which means that any development must meet a certain level of greening. But it also enshrines another really important principle, which has been introduced in this London Plan, and the urban greening factor was not included before, and neither was net biodiversity gain. So if any developer is undertaking a development on a piece of land, then it must be the case that whatever was there at the beginning, and it has to be assessed in terms of an environmental impact assessment, after the development is complete, the biodiversity on that site has got to be improved over what was there in the first place. And that is a really important principle to introduce in the urban area. I mentioned earlier on that the London Plan also provides, and also through the supplementary planning guidance of the All London Green Grid, it provides protections for green belt, metropolitan open land and some other open space. But we are in a difficult situation in the sense that a lot of the boroughs find it very hard to protect the open space, because the way the planning legislation has been changed by government to give priority, for example, if somebody wants to create a new school. So it's not just about pressure from housing on the green belt or metropolitan open land. There are other pressures on those precious open spaces. So the mayor has done his best in the London plan to protect it as much as possible. Local plans should be in conformity with the London plan, but we do need to have the national planning policy framework strengthened much more in favour of supporting the maintenance of these green open spaces. And that would also fit with what the Committee on Climate Change has been calling for overall for the whole of the nation. Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Peter Gammons for UKIP. There's a comment that's just in: rewilding, stop destroying. We need more forests, less concrete, more imperfect parks with meadows and scrubland for birds and the wildlife. How do you have that in a capital like London and also have all the vital housing needs?
Well, I think that the Conservative and Labour, who've had the administration of London since 2020, have failed London because they've encouraged development of multi-million homes and have failed to provide genuinely affordable houses, and have failed to provide social housing that's needed. Olympic Park and others could have been done so differently. They've allowed greedy developers who just want to make multiple millions on every couple of properties they sell. And I think we have to review all of this. We have to stop this. We need a mayor who will focus on affordable housing and genuinely affordable housing, and not like the Conservatives are pushing, where 100,000 homes for 100,000, but actually you only own a tiny part of it. But it will push for genuinely affordable homes, which I have plans for in areas where it's not going to greatly impact the environment. And as I said, I think they've already let us down. How will I work with it? I already support many of these environmental charities, and I will work hand in hand with them to see what needs protecting, where we can develop, and because I think this is very important, and they know it better than I do. They know it better than anyone else that's watching this too, and so that's important.
Thank you. Paul Scully, MP representing the Conservatives and representing the mayoral candidate Sean Bailey. How important are the green spaces to Mr. Bailey, and how's he going to protect them?
They're really important. London isn't just a city for people following Dick Whittington and sort of trying to, make a fortune or something like just live, sleep, work, sleep, these kind of things. It needs to be there for families, for everybody. I talked about the fact that 8 out of 10 boroughs within London have got the or sort of 8 out of the 10 areas around the country that have got the least green spaces are actually in London, and 40% of ethnic minority members of the community are
how's Sean going to protect them?
That. So what we need to do is we need to make sure that he can work with the boroughs to identify the buildings, areas and spaces with local aesthetic importance. So it's not just about parks, but it is about open spaces in general that we can label as areas of outstanding urban beauty. So we can strengthen planning protections there in an amended London plan, and actually release funds as well to improve land and buildings around those zones. One example of that would be like Warren Farm in Ealing, for example, to make sure that gets protected from urban development.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much, candidates. Neil, thank you for fielding those questions as well. We're as ever, we're pushing tight on time. I keep reintroducing you fully in case people are joining us for the first time. It's time for your closing statements, please. We are just coming up to 10 to 9, so we will drop off air at 9 o'clock. So please keep them punching and keep them short. Closing statement, first of all, Rob Blackie, can you possibly in 30 seconds put together your final thoughts so that people have got stuff to think about when they close down their laptops this evening?
Thank you, everybody, for coming along tonight. And thanks again to everyone here for the work you do every day to make our city better. We have a clear choice at this election. We can keep on as normal. We can keep on building roads for polluting lorries like the Silvertown Tunnel. We can oppose clean air initiatives like the ULEZ, or we can take back the opportunity to build back better, creating good green jobs, green homes and clean air. If you'd like to join us, visit us at louisaforlondon.co.uk.
Thank you very much. That is Rob Blackie speaking for the Liberal Democrats there. Dr. Peter Gammons is talking for himself and as the UKIP candidate. Your final thoughts for us, please, Peter.
Why would I be the best mayor for London? I'm very much a centrist. My mother voted Labour, my father voted Liberal, other family members voted Conservative. And so I can understand every perspective, and I'll draw together a non-partisan team of the best people that are available for London and ensure that nobody's left out and that every consideration is made so that we don't push through on something without thinking through the implication, for example, for the disabled and other people. So I have an ability to see every angle, to feel for people who are left out as well. And so I think people should vote for me for mayor because I'll draw together a non-partisan team to run London better than it's being run now.
Leonie Cooper, how is Sadiq Khan going to continue running London, and is it going to be better than it's being run now?
Thank you, Julia. And also, can I just take this opportunity to thank you for chairing this? Amazingly, I'm more used to seeing you climbing mountains on the television, so it's nice to see you actually sitting down for a change.
It's a nice change.
And thank you also to Neil for trying to bring the flesh out of all of the different questions in the chat. And obviously apologies to all of those people who didn't get their questions asked. Look, this is really difficult because we've got so much to say. We're all so passionate about the environment. Sadiq is really passionate about the environment. But when he was elected in 2016, no one could have foreseen what was going to happen towards the end of this term. And indeed, it's been extended by a whole year. The vaccine gives us light at the end of the tunnel, but it's going to be a really difficult next 3 years, I think it's fair to say. So just as in 1945, we needed to build back after the war, this election is about how we choose to respond and develop in the aftermath of this historic pandemic. And I would just like to say for people listening, I hope I've convinced you to make Sadiq your #1 choice on the ballot. He's very, very committed to the environment. But if you still feel that you might want to put the Green Party or the Liberal Democrats, who are also committed on environmental issues, we work very closely together in the Assembly and in City Hall. It's not like Parliament, it's not so confrontational. But if you do want to put the Green Party or the Liberal Democrats first, do make Sadiq your second choice. We are all on the same page in terms of the environment. And I think it's really important for London that as we build back for a brighter and better future, that you do make sure that we don't have people who want to cancel expanding the ULEZ and are not committed to challenging the climate crisis and doing what we need to mitigate and adapt. Thank you.
Thank you, Leonie. That's Leonie Cooper speaking on behalf of Sadiq Khan there. Paul Scully, MP, who is representing the Conservative Party, is here tonight speaking on behalf of Sean Bailey. Paul, your final thoughts, please, to leave everybody with food for thought.
Thanks, Julia. Thanks again for chairing. Neil, thanks so much for putting this together, bringing us together. And thanks to all the other candidates and representatives for a really interesting discussion and great questions as well. Look, I personally, as a Londoner, don't want to have someone that wants to be mayor just for being mayor's sake, for having a picture in the papers and increasing his PR and events budgets. I want someone that can lead Londonship, give strong leadership for the city that we all love, that we're all proud to live in these really difficult times, so we can build back better, we can build back greener. In this context, we want to make sure if we're going to get people back out on the streets walking and cycling, we want to make sure that they are as safe as possible, feel as safe as possible. Sean's going to do that by hiring more than 8,000 police officers and reopening 38 police stations. We want to make sure that they are breathing cleaner air as well. That's going to be helped by a zero-emission bus fleet by 2025 and interest-free loans for black cab drivers to go fully electric. But we also want to make sure that they have public transport options as well, realistic public transport options to get out of their cars by their own accord and know that there's a tube, there's a bus, there's a taxi, there's riverboats and all of these things available to them. You can have that with a London Infrastructure Bank, which will help start to further improve transport and fixing TfL's finances by introducing corporate sponsorship on the tube network and protecting under 18 travel and over 60s free travel as well. But importantly, finally, we just need someone that will work strongly with the boroughs, collaboratively with government to make sure that we can get things done and build back greener.
Thank you, Paul Scully. Sian Berry for the Green Party. Your final thoughts, please.
Thank you so much. I've really enjoyed this, and I'm going to save the chat because I haven't been able to keep up with it, but I know there are a ton of links in there that I want to keep. Thank you for the questions as well from the audience. Now, people have the choice in this election. It is a different election. You can vote for something hugely positive with your first preferences this time. The kind of joined up green recovery Londoners are crying out for, the truly healthy city, the healthy society that comes with and alongside a healthy environment. There are Greens running cities all over Europe now, green mayors rolling up their sleeves, planning a new start for their cities. And I want that for London too. We could and should be the greenest city in the world. So if you want green, vote green first. And make sure you elect more Green Assembly members. We work hard and push ideas into the programmes of all the mayors. We defend things like the cycling budget against being cancelled, which was going to happen under Ken Livingstone. We fight against things like the Silvertown Tunnel from Sadiq Khan, and we fought Boris Johnson on so many issues as well. We are there to hold whoever is mayor to account, and there's a fair ballot for that. So please make sure there are more Greens on the London Assembly to make sure your voices are heard after the 6th of May.
Thank you very much, Sean Berry, for the Green Party there. And thanks to everybody who joined in tonight and for participating and for sending in your questions. And candidates, thank you very much as well for all of your passionate answers and for getting involved. It's been lovely to hear you talk and to be able to banter a little bit. The format of things doesn't let you cross over and talk too much amongst one another. But one more question for all of you before you go. And in any particular order, I'm going to let you decide who's going to answer this first. What is your favourite green space in the capital and why? Fight it out amongst yourselves.
Tooting Common.
Hampstead Heath, I represent it, and I bet you represent Tooting Common as well.
Tooting Common's 30 seconds walk from my house. It's fantastic.
St James's Park. St James's Park for me is just 5 minutes to walk around there. And the amount of times I de-stress there and then find I'm taking exactly the same photo across the water to Buckingham Palace and putting it on Instagram. I must have done that half a dozen times and keep forgetting I've done it.
Never gets boring.
Kew Gardens.
Sorry, Peter, Kew Gardens.
Yeah, I love it.
Yeah,
like my trees.
Of course you do. You like your trees. Sean, did we hear from you?
Yeah, Hampstead Heath. I represent it.
Hampstead Heath, of course. Well, that's good to hear that you're all enjoying the lovely green.
Let's go quickly. Go to Brockwell Park, see the terrifying trees that my children scare me by climbing.
Why are they so terrifying, Rob?
That's because my children managed to get so incredibly high.
Every parent's nightmare, but very good for them.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you all very much. It's been really great to hear your opinions and your views, and we've had so much chatter on the chat bar as well. Let me see if I can just leave you with a few final thoughts. What have we got here? Removing as much tarmac and paving as is practical, and let the soil get some air and greenery. That's one of the comments that have come in there. Planning to monitor pollution changes after the Silvertown operation. A lot of anti-Silvertown Tunnel messaging coming up tonight from everybody. Sadiq Khan is hardly passionate about the environment while he's building the polluting, congestion-inducing Silvertown Tunnel. Somebody else says there, and that is something that has been echoed quite a lot this evening. Disabled people who need an assistant to travel have to pay to travel on public transport. Last year, Sadiq Khan mentioned a companion pass. However, it hasn't been referred to this year. I wonder if that's still in policy. That would be a good policy, I think, for any of the candidates to adopt. And somebody here, I belong to a car club, Zipcar, fantastic, much cheaper than owning your own car. And if I use a van, I can use a van if I need to move furniture along. The poor are not driving; they can't afford it. So says somebody else. There we go. I think that is absolutely where we're at. We're coming up to 2 minutes to 9. We've been incredibly. We've managed to stick to time. We've heard from all of our candidates from the 5 leading parties, lots of issues to carry on discussing. Please participate and continue asserting your views to candidates and assembly members. You, as I said, have heard from the 5 leading candidates this evening, but obviously there are more, many more candidates standing, and you can find out more about them and what they stand for, alongside lots of other information about the more natural capital agenda and the manifesto, which I highly recommend that you read. And you'll find it on the Wildlife and Countryside Link website, and that is wcl.org.uk. It's 20:59. We've made it to time. Thanks for joining us, everybody. I'm Julia Bradbury, and good night.
Thank you, Julia.